A lot of familiar faces out there. I hope everyone is having a fabulous evening so far. And you know what? It is just about that time. So I think we can go ahead and jump right in. We've got a great crowd gathered here. So I would like to say, welcome everyone. Big official welcome to the Herbal Basics for Winter Health class with Linda Conroy. I'm really excited to see you all here. I'm Beth Creek, part of the Midwest Women's Herbal Organizing Team, and I've been involved with the conference and other events with Linda for the last 7 or 8 years or so, including producing our virtual conferences. So if you've attended one of those, give me a wave. It's good to see you again. Next, I'd like to introduce Maria Falche. She'll be working behind the scenes. She's another member of our core organizing team. She's the administrative coordinator, and she's the glue who holds us all together and keeps us on track. So she'll be providing technical support tonight. So if you have any technical issues, you can pop those into the chat to let her know, and she will help you out. Now, speaking of the chat, I would love to know who made a tea or infusion for tonight's gathering. So if you would please find the chat and go ahead and type in what kind of tea or infusion you brought with you tonight. That would be fantastic. I know I've got some Tulsi right here. So let's see what we've got. All right, Linden. Oh, there's a lot of Linden. Yay. Tulsi Rose. Oh, that's one of my favorites. I love Tulsi Rose. Fresh ginger. Oh, lots of great infusions and teas, and Oat Straw. Judith, that's one of my favorites. Thank you for putting that information out there. Keep an eye on that and see if there's any new teas or infusions that you want to try out. Now, this is going to be a shorter program. We only have about an hour together, so let's get to what we're going to learn tonight. So we're going to discuss some specific herbs, and we'll talk about the In Our Own Hands Women's Wellness Series. That also involves herbal knowledge and other practices to enhance your well-being this winter. So make sure you stick around to the end of the event when we'll reveal a discount code for that series. And just a little background before we jump in. Midwest Women's Herbal provides herbal education and enriching experiences. And it's fostered the most amazing community of women who really support each other and celebrate each other's growth. And it's a really, really beautiful thing to be a part of. All right, so let's get to the main part of our program. I am thrilled to introduce Linda Conroy. So Linda is a bioregional herbalist who is not only the owner of Moonwise Herbs, fabulous shop, but the founder of the Midwest Women's Herbal Conference, which has been around for over a decade now. It's quite an accomplishment. The Mycelium Mysteries Mushroom Retreat, and the brain behind a lot of great ideas that help support this community. So welcome, Linda.
Thank you, Bethany. Thanks for being here, and super excited to spend the evening with all of you. And it was really fun to see all the different teas and infusions that people were popping into the chat. So welcome everybody. Herbs for Winter Health we're going to talk about. And I put together a short slideshow just so we'd have some images of some of the plants. And I was thinking about it. I'm like, well, every herb is for winter health, really, ultimately. So when you have, a nice apothecary, you can pick a different herb for different reasons. And it's kind of fun because you can have a lot of diversity. So, and you really only need a few herbs to cover a lot of bases. And certainly one of the herbs that I have here on the cover slide is a picture of elderberry without the berries on it. So it's the stalk of the elderberry. And you can see that this represents something that maybe many of you have heard of, is the doctrine of signatures, where a plant looks like the part of the body that it supports or heals or mends or etc. And this certainly looks like one of the lobes of the lungs with the arteries the capillaries and arteries in the lungs. And so elderberry is certainly one of my very favorite herbs that I like to incorporate into my winter health regiment, or winter health teas and infusions and other preparations. So I wanted to also just, I'm going to flip around on these slides a little bit, just show you this photo of elderberry with the berries on it. And certainly all the parts of the plant actually are healing. Some of them stronger than others. I've put on the slide, I've put them in order of the most mild part of the plant, what as I would see it, would be the flowers. They're great if you make a flower tea. I don't know if I saw anybody who made elderflower tea in the chat, but that's a delicious one, and it promotes sweating. It can help, which can help reduce a fever. It also has some antiviral qualities like the berries do as well. And then the berries would be, in my mind, the next part of the plant that's a little bit stronger. And then I know a lot of people talk about the bark and the root being poisonous, but actually what it really is a stronger medicine that you would just take in a lower dose. And we can take those as a tea or a tincture in a much lower dose than the berries or flowers. So I wanted to, I know elderberry is fairly well known and popular, but I wanted to talk about my favorite way to prepare it, which is an Oxymoron syrup, which is a vinegar and honey syrup preparation. And you actually could make the Oxymoron with either the flowers or the berries. Either one would be really nice. So that is the elderberry, and it's so, in my region and really everywhere I've ever lived in the US, elderberry grows, and it's I often call it one of those ditch plants because it grows in the ditches. It's everywhere. So it's quite abundant. So that is one of the plants I wanted to talk about. And of course you can make a tea, you can make a tincture, but like I said, my favorite way to prepare it is in a honey and a vinegar syrup. So that is the first herb. Let's see. And then the second herb I wanted to talk about, and I would say that chamomile is one of the most underutilized herbs and one of the most available herbs. So I don't know if people can go to your emoji and give a wave or raise your hand if you have a chamomile tea bag or some loose chamomile somewhere in your house. Because one of the things I find, and let's see, I can see, I think most people, I'm seeing some hands, lots of hands, yes. And I always like to ask this question to crowds, because what I'll find is there's usually, a good 80 to 90% of people have chamomile, in their environment and don't think to utilize it for colds and flus and things like that. We only think about it as maybe a calming or relaxing herb. But it actually is it has antioxidants, it's antispasmodic, so it's great for reducing coughs. It helps you sleep if you don't feel well. It helps to soothe a sore throat. And it just has so many applications that I really like to bring it to people's attentions. If your eyes are sore, when you have a cold or a flu, you can put tea bags, just warm tea bags on your eyes. That feels really good if you've never done that. That's I'll give you a couple of homework assignments throughout the time we're together. So one of your homework assignments is to put some warm chamomile tea bags on your eyes and to see how soothing that is. And then a second homework assignment, anybody who's spent much time with me, especially in any of my immersion programs, I love foot baths. And chamomile as a foot bath is really, really wonderful. And chamomile, similar to elderflower, is another one of those herbs that can help promote sweating, called a diaphoretic, and it can actually help to relieve a fever as well. And for babies, we often will bathe them in chamomile, but for adults, you can do a foot bath. You could bathe in it too, of course. But and if you bathe in it, what I recommend is you make a really strong tea and pour the tea in your bath. Don't just put a little bit of herb in there because you're not going to get the benefit. You want it to be really strong. And same with your foot bath. So your homework is to do a chamomile eye treatment and then a chamomile foot bath. And I guarantee you over the winter months that will just help you relax, help you feel calm, and it'll help you if you are sweating and you're needing to break a fever. And of course, when we're talking about breaking a fever, fever is a protective mechanism of the body. And so I always like to remind people that those mechanisms aren't things we always want to get rid of or make go away. Even mucus, when we talk about colds and flus and winter health, people often, I have mucus. It's like, well, mucus is actually ultimately protective. It's not something you necessarily want to get rid of. It can be irritating and you might want some relief from it, but it's really important to remember that when your body is producing mucus, it's really protecting itself, as, with a mild fever as well. Your body is trying to protect itself, and it's an immune mechanism that is supportive, actually. So that is chamomile. Now, I think in most places I've been, you can find a wild chamomile called pineapple weed, which is the one I have a picture of here. And one of the reasons I wanted to share the picture is because some people aren't familiar with this plant. And this plant actually, unlike the true chamomile that we think of when we think of the garden variety of chamomile, it has ray flowers or petals, whereas the pineapple weed actually does not. So this is the disc flower, and that is something you might see out and about. You might go, well, that kind of looks like chamomile, but I'm not sure. Is it chamomile? It has the same exact properties as chamomile, so you can harvest the wild plant if you don't have access to the other plants, or if you prefer wild plants, which I often do. I'm a real advocate for bringing in the wild into your life and your herbal journey. So
now I want to interject and just say, Linda, one of my favorite things that I've learned about herbs and herbal healing is that I love being able to go outside and find what I'm looking for, like what my body needs, just right outside my door. Like that's just so amazing to me.
Right. And that's with pineapple weed. That's one of those things that, can be right outside your door. And funny about pineapple weed, it loves gravel. If anybody knows this about this plant, and it grows in places where people walk or drive. And it's sometimes you're like, I don't know if I'm going to harvest it there, but yeah, it's right outside the door for sure. And with chamomile, you actually want to make a tea with chamomile, which is your typical 1 teaspoon of herb to every cup of water. And if you let it steep longer, it's going to get really bitter. And so that means the water is getting behind the cell wall, which isn't a bad thing necessarily, but it's not enjoyable. And that's another thing. If people just want to raise your hand in the chat, if you have ever let your chamomile tea steep longer than 10 or 15 minutes and had that experience of tasting bitter chamomile. So raise your hand if you've had that experience. And so don't think of that as a bad thing, okay? You just want to think of it this way, okay? Chamomile is very relaxing and calming and has all of these qualities, but when it becomes bitter, it turns into a bitter digestive medicine. So it's just different. And so in that case, then I would just take it by the spoonful if I had an upset tummy or, needed some help with digestion. Then I would just take it more like a medicine. So it's not oftentimes when we're working with herbs, we'll think of it in this dichotomy of good and bad or this kind of thing, but it's not bad. It's just not the same. It's not any more an enjoyable beverage. It's more of a strong medicine. So it changes. It's still a good medicine when it's sweet as well. So it just shifts gears. And of course, in the tea form, when you steep it only for 5 or 10 minutes, it just has that really nice, pleasant, sweet taste to it. But don't throw it away if it's bitter.
That is so good to know.
Yes.
And really quick question, Linda. Someone's wondering why it's called pineapple weed. And I'm wondering, is it because it kind of resembles?
Yeah, for a
Pineapple maybe a little
couple
bit?
reasons, actually, and this helps you with identification. One is the disc flower here. Are you able to see my cursor, Bethany?
Yes.
When I'm moving it? Oh, good, because that helps. This disc flower, which is what we're looking at here, is the center flower. This is an Asteraceae family, so it has a disc flower. The disc flower is shaped a little bit more like a pineapple than the actual true chamomile. When we think of chamomile, it's not really true chamomile, but the garden variety of chamomile is more flat. And so this looks a little bit more like a pineapple, and it smells like pineapple. So those are the two reasons why we call it pineapple weed. And actually, so before we started, Maria and Bethany and I were having a conversation about vinegar and how much we enjoy steeping herbs in vinegar. And I have to tell you, pineapple weed is one of the most delicious vinegars infused vinegars that I've ever made. So if you've never made a pineapple weed vinegar, next time you find a big lot of pineapple weed, make an infused vinegar. So you just chop up the herb. I use raw apple cider vinegar, pour vinegar on top of it, let it steep for 4 to 6 weeks. And then that vinegar can be, your medicine or your food. So it can be drizzled on greens, it can be added to a salad dressing, or you can make a switchel drink with it. And so that would be, taking the vinegar and putting a little bit of sweetener in some water, and you can drink it iced or at room temperature, and it's super, super delicious. So, and I think, Bethany, I sent you a link to recipes that are on my website. And one of those recipes is for switchel. If you want the ratios, you can look there. But yeah, pineapple weed vinegar is very, very delicious. And it's, it is a medicine as well. So if you enjoy vinegars, that's a delicious one. And you could do that with, your typical chamomile as well, although it'll have a little bit of a different flavor.
Great.
So, good question about how to identify it.
Yeah, and there's another question in the chat that I've been curious about. So Gina's wondering, what's the difference between, Roman chamomile, German chamomile? Are there medicinal qualities that are different from those regions?
Yeah, well, some chamomiles have more volatile oils in them and are stronger than others, and so they have different flavors, but they all have the similar qualities. It's really like when you're looking for the qualities, they're all very similar. So it's really more a matter of the flavor of them.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I wanted to talk about the difference between a tea and an infusion, because a lot of people have that question. So like I said, with chamomile, you steep it for 5 to 10 minutes. And if you steep it a lot longer, it's going to get that bitter quality to it. So that you want to make a tea with your herbs that have a lot of volatile oils, including your mints. Those are also, if you're peppermint, spearmint, even like one of my favorite mints, which is a great wintertime herb, is bee balm or Monarda fistulosa. And those would all be steeped just for about 5 or 10 minutes. And by the way, bee balm also makes a delicious vinegar. Super, super delicious. It has thymol in it, and thymol is antispasmodic. So that's going to make a wonderful And again, another nice oxymol, which is antispasmodic and helpful for relieving a cough, and also has some antiviral qualities. So those herbs would all be steeped just for in water for 5 or 10 minutes as a tea, because if you let them sit around, again, they're just going to get really strong. They're going to get more bitter. So those herbs, what we're looking for is on the outside of the cell wall of the plant. If we're trying to get behind the cell wall of the plant and we want to get more of the nutrition and more of the other qualities that are behind the cell wall, we have to steep the plant for a longer period of time. And so that's where we would go into infusion making. So I just, I put this slide together just to say, why would we make an infusion or a longer steep preparation? And I made my, I'm drinking it as we speak, my Linden Infusion this evening. I made it earlier today, so it was steep, because you want to steep these for anywhere from 4 to 8 hours. And flowers, less time. So Linden, we're using the flower, so that's a 4-hour steep. Whereas if you have nettle, with Bethany, you want to show people your nettle infusion. She made the most beautiful dark green nettle infusion. So that one you definitely want to steep for 8 hours, because it's just going to take longer because the plant material is denser. And roots, especially if you're making an infusion of roots, you want to steep those longer. I saw in the chat somebody made an infusion of burdock, and I always forget to put that on my list. I have to get it on there because burdock is a beautiful infusion. It's very earthy, but I really enjoy it when we make it. So roots would be definitely closer to the 8-hour steep mark, where flowers you can steep for a little less time, more like 4 hours. So why would we make an infusion where we're going to utilize a lot more plant material? It's one with linden, it's a 1/2 ounce. With most of the other herbs, it's a weighted ounce of herb to every quart of water. So the why is that they're nourishing, tonifying, and healing. So when we talk about herbs for winter health, one of the really important things to think about is that we want to make sure that we're being well nourished, and we are, going into the realm of prophylactics or preventative ways of strengthening our body and keeping our bodies strong and helping our bodies to regenerate. So interesting. I know we're going to talk a little bit about the Women's Wellness Series this evening, and the workshop that I'm going to do as part of that series is going to be about our bodies and how our bodies naturally regenerate and how we can support that process. And the infusions help the body to do that. The body actually turns over cells, and we can actually incorporate herbs to help our bodies do that and help our bodies heal and nourish themselves and do the job that they are meant to do. So when we're trying to treat something, sometimes we're trying to force something to happen, but when we're practicing in a regenerative way, we actually are helping the body do the job it was meant to do. And so the infusions really, really do that. And they do both. They actually relieve symptoms, and they help strengthen and tonify and nourish and regenerate the body. So this is the why of the infusions. Sometimes people think, well, does it really matter to steep it longer and utilize a whole lot more herb? It does. It really matters. And so, again, it's 1 ounce of herb for most herbs, but with linden, it's a 1/2 for, and then with linden, you can do it second steep with cold water, and it'll be even more mucilaginous, which means it's going to be really soothing to the mucous membrane. So if you have a sore throat or a really dry cough, linden is a great herb. And I think linden is a very underutilized herb in a lot of ways because it has so many benefits. It's anti-inflammatory, it's super soothing, it's calming, relaxing, it helps promote sleep. It really, really supports the body in so many ways. And this is another herb that's quite abundant, and you can find it a lot of places and harvest a fair amount of it in pretty easily, at least, in most of the places that I've lived, we've been able to harvest a lot of it. So I make these a lot of times at night before I go to bed. And the list, so here at the top here, I have a list of some of the other infusions I like. Oat Straw is another one. I saw that in the chat that a lot of people were ingesting Oat Straw, and Oat Straw is calming, relaxing. It's tonifying and nourishing and fortifying to the nervous system. And the past couple of years, the stress that most of us have been dealing with, I mean, when we talk about winter health, we don't want to forget that not only are we trying to ward off colds and flus and viruses, but we're also wanting to reduce our stress and help our bodies deal with the stress that we've experienced. And oat straw is just that herb that really, really helps to fortify the nervous system and strengthen it and help us be able to move through whatever else we're dealing with. And stinging nettle, Bethany held up her her infusion. She can do that again. And it's so beautiful how green it is. And nettle, you know, sometimes we forget, but nettle is a lung herb. It really helps to nourish the lungs. And so, you know, that's certainly something. Oh, I spelled urtica wrong. I apologize. There's no N. I just noticed there. I need an editor for my PowerPoint. But it's really strengthening to the lungs. It's supportive of the kidneys. It moves fluids through the body. It gives us a whole complex of vitamins and minerals that help to strengthen our bodies. And, you know, I heard herbalist Paul Berkner say when he was doing a presentation early on when the COVID virus started hitting, and he said that the best antivirals are bodies, and really meaning like the stronger, the more we can fortify and strengthen and nourish our bodies, you know, and not to say we can't utilize other things to help support our bodies, but one of the mainstays, we really want to strengthen our bodies. So things like oat straw and stinging nettle are, you know, they're like good foundations for keeping the body strong. And then throughout the winter, I drink elderberry, and this is very rare for me to combine herbs like this, but elderberry and rosehip infusion has become one of my favorite infusions as an antiviral, antioxidant, nourishing, strengthening infusion. So I am encouraging you to try those two separately to see how they taste separately, but also try them together because they're very delicious.
And there is a question about, you know, what can you add to, you know, nettle or really any infusion that if the taste is like if nettle is a little bit too green for you. I know when I first started drinking infusions, I would add like a little bit of fruit juice to it. And then eventually I kind of grew to just love the taste of the infusions themselves.
Well, here's a little tip and thing about nettle. Nettle is more savory than it is sweet. And I think we just have to shift our minds about this, because a lot of times when we think of a tea, we think of something sweet, right? That's where our brain goes, because we, especially in this culture, we've been conditioned. But nettle really is more like a vegetable. Like when you drink it, you think vegetable, right? You think green, you think spinach. You know, I've talked to people about this, and you know, we'll come up with all kinds of words, and it's always vegetable words. So if you really struggle with the flavor of it, add salt, add tamari, make it into a broth with miso. Go in that direction. Don't stick with the sweetness, because it really is not a sweet tea. So for a lot of people, it's going to be nicer. You can use it as a base in a soup, right? So just bring it in a more savory way. And oftentimes when I encourage people to do that, people enjoy it a lot more. You can also make ice cubes with it and then put it in other things that you're drinking. So you don't have to drink it straight up if it's something that you know, that it's so green. And I personally have found that I much more enjoy nettle when I utilize the nettle that I've harvested myself, that I've wild harvested, than commercial cut and sifted nettle. That's I think the flavor is nicer. So if you've never harvested nettle, make it your goal. Here's your homework. In the spring this year, you're going to go out and find some nettle and harvest it yourself and make an infusion from what you've harvested and notice the difference. There's a big difference. And so you might enjoy that better. I know I do. If I usually run out at some point. I harvest as much as I can. And then I always am like, okay, I have to drink commercial nettle now. And I'll drink it, but it's definitely, I prefer my wild crafted nettle. So those are some tips about drinking nettle and bringing it in a more palatable way. And, I think, I work in the wise woman tradition, and the focus is on nourishment and food and strengthening. And whenever possible, I'm trying to help people make things taste good and be enjoyable. So don't struggle with it. You can find a way to enjoy it.
And then a quick question, since we're on nettle and talking about wild harvesting, question coming in. Does wood nettles have the same, beneficial properties as stinging nettles?
Okay, so nutritionally, we would guess absolutely. Here's the thing about some plants. So, some plants have been studied and researched, and nettle would be one of those plants that there's been a lot of research. We know what the nutritional profile is. We know the healing benefits of stinging nettle, the Urtica dioica. And so we have information. We don't have a lot of information on wood nettle that hasn't been studied, it hasn't been researched. And so if I were to utilize an herb therapeutically, say I was trying to help somebody with the restoration of their kidneys, I would specifically want to employ Urtica dioica, just because we know for a fact that it has that capacity to support. Also, if I was helping somebody to deal with seasonal allergies or pet allergies, I would have them drink Urtica dioica, and it's dried herb made into the infusion. As far as nutrition is concerned, there is no doubt in my mind that wood nettle is super high in nutrition. We don't have the numbers. It hasn't been evaluated the way that stinging nettle has. But as far as eating and strengthening, diversity in our diet of greens is really, really good for us. So absolutely eat it. It's more from a therapeutic standpoint where I would be a little bit more picky about which plant I would choose. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
And that's true. That happens with a lot of herbs. Like, I'm a big fan of looking for analogs or quote unquote substitutes that grow around me, because I would prefer to utilize, I'm a bioregional herbalist. I really like to utilize herbs that grow around me. So speaking of which, down at the bottom of my list here in the treatment herbs, and this is a topic that Maria and I have had some great discussions about recently, about Siberian elm, which is a very weedy herb that grows in our region. Slippery elm is the plant that most people utilize, that's sold on the commercial market. That is a very soothing herb. It can actually help with, you can make cough drops with it or drink a tea, and it's very soothing, again, to the mucous membranes. It's soothing. It's for digestive health. It helps to ease digestion. It has a lot of really wonderful qualities. It helps to, if you're constipated, it can help to move your bowels. And so, and in our region in the Midwest, Siberian elm is a major weed tree. I have a couple in my yard. Maria, that's why we were talking about it. Maria has some in her yard. And Siberian elm has the exact same qualities. And slippery elm, actually, it's making a comeback, but it is on the United Plant Savers endangered list, because there was an insect that was destroying the trees at one point, and they have been planted and they're regenerating and people are growing them. But if I have this weed tree, Siberian elm, that has the same qualities, I can go out and utilize it, even though it hasn't been researched and studied. And you can just tell by tasting it that, as soon as you chew on the bark, you get this mucilaginous, gooey quality in your mouth. So yes, we can, switch it up and look around us and see what's around us. People around the world utilize what plants for the qualities they're looking for right around them. And we can utilize our senses to learn what those qualities are a lot of times. Does that answer that question?
I think so.
Okay. Maybe longer than you wanted. All right. So and again, the other I made a slide just for mullein. Let me see if I can call it up here. And so mullein is another herb that I really like for winter health. It is a lung herb, and I wanted to show you this slide because this certainly looks like the lungs. If you've ever had the opportunity to touch a lung, it's very spongy, just like mullein is, and just like mullein looks here. And mullein is the quintessential lung tonic, lung healer, and drinking this on a regular basis in infusion form is really, really strengthening to the lungs. And right now, with COVID being predominantly a virus that affects the lungs, keeping your lungs as strong as possible is really important. And it always has been for me. In the fall, I usually start drinking Mullein Infusion. I started that when I used to substitute teach. And of course, schools are breeding grounds for viruses and bacteria and, colds and flus. So when I substitute taught, I started drinking this heavily in the fall and just drank it all through the winter. And it really helps to strengthen the lungs and helps to prevent colds and flus. And sometimes these things help to not only prevent, but lessen the severity of what you're dealing with. Certainly, like our antiviral herbs, we suspect can, reduce the severity of viral infections. And so, we can see that mullein has the signature for the lungs. And so that is just such a great infusion to make. So you make it with the 8-hour steeped infusion with the dried herb. Over on the right here is some mullein that it's drying in my studio this year. And so I like to dry as much as I can. It's, it's so abundant where I live, so we can harvest a lot of it. And one of the fun ways to prepare this is as a hot infusion with a little bit of milk in it. It's super delicious. And sometimes we'll make mullein lattes, which is kind of fun. So, you can change it up a little bit. The one thing about this herb, because it has the little hairs, which are part of the signature, you're going to want to strain it really well. So I utilize a gold coffee filter when I strain this, just to make sure, because it'll irritate your lungs, which, if you had a serious lung issue where you didn't have a productive cough, you might want to irritate your lungs. So that's where people smoke mullein, right? As a therapeutic strategy, you could smoke mullein to irritate your lungs to get yourself coughing. I don't recommend smoking on a regular basis. I don't think it's good for your lungs, but I think it can be a therapeutic tool for helping to encourage a productive cough. So mullein has a lot of applications. You can also tincture it. I prefer it in infusion form, but for, sometimes it's nice to put up some of these herbs for therapeutic uses in an alcohol extract, especially when you don't feel well. Sometimes it's harder to make infusions. And on that note, if you have friends who have colds or flus or anybody in your life who contracts COVID this winter, take them infusions and put them by their doorstep. Because you don't feel like making anything when you don't feel well. And so that if you feel a little helpless about what you can do for people, that's something you can do for people. Is take them some infusions and just set them right by their doorstep. So mullein and nettle and elderberry and rosehip would be a real gift that we can give to other people when they're not feeling well. So, and to ourselves, of course. So anybody, if I get sick, if you want to bring me infusions, I'm happy to receive them. All right. Any other questions?
I was wondering, looking at that list of, this great list. I was, personally, I'm always wondering, like, what should I do if I just have a sore throat? Like, my throat's a little sore. Like, should I have like a hot infusion, or should I make a tea?
It really depends on what's happening. And there's so many options. That's one of the things is, there's so many options. This list is nowhere near the, exhaustive by any means. But slippery elm or Siberian elm is great for a sore throat. I like to make lozenges, where I mix the powdered herb with some honey and roll it up into little balls and utilize that. So that's great. Another herb that isn't on my list that I love to gargle with for sore throats, that's very accessible to people, another super accessible herb. And I'll ask the question, how many of you grow garden sage in your garden? It's a lot of people will grow it, and then they won't know what to do with it. And that is one of your best herbs for gargling, that, if you have a sore throat. So there's so many different herbs. Strep throat, I actually typically like to utilize honey with barberry, with something with berberine in it. And barberry is my berberine containing plant. In the Pacific Northwest, when I lived there, we utilized Oregon grape quite a bit. I steer away from utilizing golden seal because it's endangered, but if you're growing it, you could, utilize that. It's another berberine containing plant. And the reason you could make a throat spray with that, or you could gargle with it. And the reason the berberine containing plants are so good for a throat with a bacterial infection is that it actually kills the bacteria on contact. Unlike echinacea, which echinacea is a systemic herb, and this is a formula that is out in the popular culture that seems really misguided to me when people combine echinacea with a golden seal, because they have very different actions. Golden seal kills bacteria on contact, and echinacea stimulates white blood cell activity, and it's a systemic antibiotic type herb that stimulates your own immunity. And so they're very different actions. They really don't belong together. So so those are some things I like to utilize for a sore throat. I mean, anything that's astringent, that's antibacterial, there's some yarrow, there's so many options.
Yeah, well, and shout out to Melanie, who immediately said sage for sore throat. So thank you, Melanie.
Yes.
And question, does white sage, have the same properties as like your common garden sage?
Well, it is quite astringent. It's actually more astringent than garden sage. I don't tend to utilize that, but you certainly could. I don't tend to utilize it because I don't grow it, but you certainly could. I would utilize a lot less though, because it's pretty strong. And then you also have your desert sage, which isn't a sage at all. It's actually an artemisia, but people call it desert sage, and that is awfully astringent. You would have to utilize just a very, very tiny amount. So.
Okay. And then another really interesting question, from our friend Judith, why are they called treatment herbs as opposed to other titles? So if you call something a treatment herb.
Well, when I think of a treatment herb, it's an herb I'm utilizing to relieve symptoms. And whereas the nourishing herbs and the adaptogenic herbs, I'm strengthening the body. And there's a lot of crossover. So I was just trying to make the point here that when we go into treatment, we're more trying to relieve symptoms than we are strengthening the body. Like Aloe Campaign, it actually is nourishing to some degree because it has inulin in it, which inulin is a prebiotic that helps digestion. But it's a very strong medicinal plant. So most people aren't going to want to drink a big old cup of Aloe Campaign infusion, right? So I mean, I see Maria shaking her. That does not sound good, right, Maria? So so with Aloe Campaign, and this is an important herb to know about, especially with COVID. One of the things when COVID hit and I started really looking at my apothecary and thinking about the plants that were really important, Aloe Campaign was top on my list, because Aloe Campaign is a a treatment herb. It's an antibiotic herb specifically for the respiratory system. So if a person feels like they're starting to develop pneumonia, and whether it's COVID pneumonia or some other type of pneumonia, Aloe Campaign is the first herb I'm going to grab and reach for. My favorite way to prepare this is in an oxymol again. And it's really, really potent and strong and effective. And it opens up the whole respiratory system, and plus it has those antibiotic qualities. Stephen Banner in his book, Sacred Herbal Healing Beers, it makes a beer out of Aloe Campaign, which I have made. And it was really fun to drink the beer one year when I didn't feel well. I'm like, I'm going to drink an Aloe Campaign beer. It was very delicious. But it's a very bitter medicine that is, like I said, it's definitely a medicine. Like you can taste it. It's not like sweet like oat straw. So that would be the different. When I'm thinking about treatment herbs, I'm thinking about something that's going to relieve symptoms or treat something. And when I'm thinking about infusion herbs, adaptogenic herbs, they're strengthening the body and doing that regenerative process that I'm thinking about, helping the body. Like echinacea is kind of like more. And there could be another category here, tonifying, helping the body do its work well. So dandelion, for example, is tonifying to the liver. Nettle is tonifying to the lungs.
What'd you say your favorite way to prepare Aloe Campaign is?
Oh, as an oxymol.
Okay.
As a
Perfect.
vinegar and honey syrup. Or so sometimes too, if you're not a big honey person or you're not a big vinegar person, you could just do an infused honey or just an infused vinegar. But I like to do the two together. And the thing is, if you are treating a respiratory infection, having the honey, because the honey is also, it has antibiotic qualities in it. You have raw honey, which is what I prefer to utilize as local raw honey. Then you also have the vinegar, which I use raw apple cider vinegar, is going to have some healing qualities as well. So not only is the herb healing, but your menstruums, which is your liquid that you're putting the herbs in, is also healing. And you haven't cooked them and you haven't gotten rid of the beneficial bacteria, for example, in the vinegar. And we know that our gut health is at the heart of our immune system. So anytime, like even with Aloe Campaign, even though it's a medicine, it still has that inulin in it, which is a prebiotic, which is going to strengthen the gut. And anytime you're not feeling well, it's always a good idea, if you can, to help to strengthen your digestive system as well.
Oh, fabulous. There's so much here that's just so perfect for, the flu season, the cold and flu season, everything coming up with winter. So I would actually love to pepper you with a question or two about the Women's Wellness Series that's coming up, because I know that there's a lot of, really winter appropriate, learnings to be had there. And we've got about 12 minutes left. So I want to make sure we get a little plug in for that. What inspired you to create that series? Let me turn this off
here. So, yes. So two things inspired me to create that series. One is last winter, of course, we hadn't met as a community, the Midwest Women's Herbal Conference, in person, because we started offering virtual events because of COVID. And so we decided we would do a winter women's wellness series and cover a lot of different topics, give women the opportunity to gather during the winter when we might feel more isolated or, more alone, and especially last year. And so I said, let's launch this series and let's be together for the winter and learn together. And we just had so much fun. I don't remember last year. This year, I think we have 7 workshops in the series. And last year, I think there were 7 or 8 workshops in the series. So, yes.
Yeah. So, and I know I'm so excited about the lineup that we have. So the series starts on Saturday, January 8th, and there's basically a new workshop every other Saturday through April 2nd. So like a 3-hour workshop every other Saturday. And the lineup looks amazing. So I would love to hear, who are some of your favorite presenters that we have, and what else can you tell us about this series? There's so much.
Well, there's no way I'm going to say
I know your
They're
favorite.
all my favorite presenters. we and I actually, as I'm looking out in the crowd here, I see one of our presenters, which is Reverend Judith Laxer. I'm super excited that she's going to participate. And thank you, Judith, for your willingness. Judith is actually often our ceremonial director at the in-person conferences, and she's going to be bringing the power of oracles to the Women's Wellness Series. She brings so much great spirit to the conference. So that is one workshop I'm really looking forward to. I know she's going to cover a lot of different oracle approaches, and it's just going to be really fun. So thank you, Judith.
Yes. Yes, I was excited to see her here also.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll share like one or two that I'm really excited about. We have Ellen Everett Hopman teaching us about, I just love the title, working with baneful plants for healing, magic, and homeopathy. And I don't know a ton about homeopathy, but just the idea of working with these plants that might seem scary to people who don't know much about them, and turning them into medicine, I think that's going to be really interesting.
Absolutely. And it's a really important thing for us as herbalists to be learning, because in our what last year we did a workshop with Mary Lou Singleton, which is actually, you can access that workshop on our virtual classroom. It was called Herbal Medicine in a Phytophobic World. And believe it or not, as excited as people are about herbs today, they're only excited about the safe herbs. And historically, women knew how to utilize even the deadly and poisonous herbs in magic, but also in medicine. And so when we talk about the baneful plants, we're talking about the concept of homeopathics is utilizing them in really, really dilute quantities in order to bring them in. And an example of that would be like utilizing poison ivy to help, because in homeopathics, like treats like. So you use very small quantities of poison ivy to help your body not react to poison ivy. And she's going to talk about a whole bunch of other baneful plants. I'm excited about that as well. And we have one of my elders and teachers, Isla Burgess from New Zealand, is going to be teaching, and she's going to be teaching about herbs for aging gracefully, basically. And we're all going to age, so she has some great tips and ideas for bringing herbs into our lives. And Isla is a great role model for that. She skis all winter. She's in her late 70s, and she's so active and agile, and brings the herbs into her life, and she has a lot of great tips for that. So I'm excited about that workshop as well.
Yes, it's always good to see Isla. Another one that I'm really excited about is Susan Weed, because I love hearing Susan talk. So her talking stick with spring intention setting, that's going to be amazing. The storytelling that we're going to get in that is going to be fantastic.
Well, and our stories are part of our medicine. And so being able to come together and share our stories, and there will be time, these workshops are 3 hours, they're deep dives, they're not like a quick overview like this evening. They're going to be deep dives. And so the story time, our intention is for everyone to be able to participate and share some stories that are medicine, and hearing other people's stories as medicine, and sharing your story as medicine. So so I'm excited. And then the other workshop that we're holding is with Lucretia Van Dyke, and she was with us in the fall in person at our mushroom conference, and she is doing a lot of work with ceremony and grieving, and I'm really looking forward to that. I think part of our healing right now has to be grieving. We have to really, and we need to grieve in community, not just individually isolated on our own. And I know the women who participated in person in her workshop in the fall really, really got a lot out of it. And so I'm confident that the virtual workshop will be just wonderful as well, and powerful.
Yeah.
And then go ahead. Oh, the last one. This one I'm going to save it for last because I love this title. Phytosleuthing Files. So this is a botany workshop, stories of adulteration, misunderstanding, mistakes, and how to solve them in the botanical world with medical botanist Robin Klein. Robin has been a medical botanist, I believe, for 30 or 40 years. And every time I encounter her, I learn something about identifying plants that is just mind-boggling. And I love the title. I love the idea of phyto sleuthing. So if you care to go phyto sleuthing with us, join us for Robin's workshop.
Oh, perfect. So we have got about 6 minutes left. I know we wanted to save a little bit of time for Q&A, and I've been accumulating questions. And then quick note for anyone who is interested in signing up for the Women's Wellness Series, which I hope you are, because it's going to be fabulous. We've put those links in the chat. So I've popped it in there. Maria has popped it in there. And if you have any questions, certainly put those in the chat and we'll get to them. But just to throw a couple of questions at you that have kind of come up along the way here. Let's see, is there a use for old vinegar infusions? Like if you forgot your fresh steeped vinegar infusion for say 6 months, or any old preparations, what would you do with those?
Well, I don't know if I'd consider vinegar that's been around for 6 months to be old necessarily, but one of the things I've noticed is if I leave the herb in the vinegar for a long time, sometimes it'll turn to water and it won't be acidic anymore. So in that case, then I wouldn't ingest it. It's probably going to start to rot. So I take that out and give it to my chickens. So, I end up eating it through their eggs. If you have chickens, I mean, how many people have chickens? I love those birds because anytime I feel like I'm going to waste something, it goes to them. And, they get lots of herbs. So, that keeps them really healthy and strong. So you have to smell it, taste it. I mean, I've had vinegars that have been around for 6 months that are plenty fine. So it just depends. And alcohol extracts, I mean, I have to say, I think in 25 years, I have had 1 or 2 alcohol extracts start to get funky. But other than that, I mean, when I first started making tinctures, I made way too many and I made large quantities of things that I didn't know I was never going to use because I was so excited. And I'm sure I still have a couple tinctures from that 25 years ago somewhere on my shelf. And, they're fine. They don't go bad. In Chinese medicine, they sometimes talk about leaving the herb or whatever they're utilizing because they also utilize other substances for tinctures in the preparation for 10 years because it gives more energy. So, you just have to look at it, taste it, smell it, see if it's any good. And if it's not, give it to your chickens or put it on your compost,
Compost, I like that one.
Never throw anything away. We shouldn't be throwing things away. Things should get recycled. A really good system is where you put things back and give them back to the earth. Especially
perfect. Yeah, I love that. And speaking of vinegar infusions, question came in about burdock. Like, why make a vinegar infusion instead of a decoction?
Well, one reason is because, it'll be around and you'll have it. And so another reason is that, burdock lends itself to being nice in salad dressings and for storage, but you can make a decoction. There's no reason not to. Again, burdock and nettle, both infusion and or decoction, putting that in a soup base is delicious. So I mean, it's all a matter of how much you want to ingest, because maybe you're not going to be able, I can ingest a lot more of an infusion in a sitting than I can vinegar, right? Like I'm not going to ingest, and tincture too. I always say to people, I don't utilize a lot of tinctures because you can't ingest enough of the herb a lot of times, unless, it's a low dose preparation where you only want a small dose. But like with nettle, for example, if you want to get the benefit from nettle, you'd have to drink a quart of tincture and then you'd be drunk as a skunk. So it doesn't make sense. So you have to look at what you're preparing, what your purpose is, and how you want to ingest it. And my preference most of the time is, to ingest things as food or as nourishing herbal infusions, etc.
Yeah, I'm much more likely to use a salad dressing than go for a decoction myself.
Mhm.
Then really interesting question about stingy nettles. Is it true that stingy nettles are hard on your kidneys if harvested when it's blooming?
It's true through story as the passed down, but we don't have any scientific evidence to that effect. So that's an interesting thing because I've been taught that by my elders. Many elders have teach that. I mean, I suggest that people don't harvest it after it's started to flower. And I have other reasons. I mean, that's one reason, but another reason is usually after it starts flowering, the leaves are all chewed up. Insects love nettle because it tastes so good. It's so nourishing. And usually the leaves look more beat up and chewed up. So, and then it starts to get more fibrous as well. So I don't tend to harvest nettle after it's flowering. So is it true? It's true in that I do trust my elders, but is it true? Is there scientific evidence to prove that? And would 1 cup of infusion cause that effect? Probably not, but maybe bucket loads might.
Great, thank you. And we're
That's one of
at
those Mythbusters. I just want to
right.
mention it made me think of that at our spring conference, which we are holding our spring conference May 27th, 28th, and 29th in May in person. Lisa Ganora, who's an amazing, really engaging herbalist from Colorado, will be doing a workshop called Herbal Mythbusters. And so there's all these herbal ideas out there, right? That, are they true or are they not? And so she does a whole workshop on busting herbal myths. So that just popped into my mind when I was thinking about that question.
Love that. And then, if we're just about out of time, but I think we could probably tackle another question or two if anyone wants to hang around. But I did want to mention that we do have a discount code for the Women's Wellness Series. We would love for you all to join us for all 7 workshops because all of them are going to be amazing. So if you use full series 25, I put it in the chat. It is case sensitive. Use that for $25 off the entire series. So that's really exciting. And don't forget that early bird pricing, I believe that ends on December 20th. So we want to get registered as soon as we can. So I can either throw another question at you, or I can share my screen and show everyone the website because it is really pretty.
We could do both.
Let's do both. All right. So while I bring up the website, the question is, so if you're wild crafting nettle, do you dry it first before you infuse it, or can you just use it fresh and off you go?
Absolutely, you want to dry it. And here's why. For the infusions, because we want to get behind the cell wall, drying makes the cell wall more fragile. And so the hot water will get behind the cell wall in 4 to 8 hours. If you have fresh plant material, it'll take 4 to 8 weeks to get behind that cell wall. And if you tried to make infusions with fresh plant material, the preparation would be rotten before it would be ready to use. So absolutely dried plant material for infusions. Teas, on the other hand, because you want to get what's on the outside of the cell wall, you can utilize fresh plant material or dried. It's up to you. So for like chamomile and mints and those herbs that are aromatic.
Great. And there's one last question that came in that's really specific. It's, what would you recommend to use for gastritis?
That is a question that I wouldn't want to answer because I would have some questions for the person who was dealing with gastritis. So I'm not going to answer a specific treatment question. And yeah, because I would have more questions than I would have potentially answers
Sure.
before I could give a good answer.
So. Yeah, so find your local herbalist, your local, neighborhood herbalist, and have a consultation. You can go through all of those questions to get the full story, right?
Absolutely.
And then quick question came in: if you make an infusion with burdock, is that with the root? Is that what we've been talking about with burdock specifically, just the root?
Yes, with the root. And you can make an infusion with the leaf, but I will tell you that it will be more bitter than anything you've ever tasted. And you probably wouldn't like it very much. Although, you know, again, you could take it by the spoonful as a better digestive aid, but you would not enjoy the infusion, believe me. But the root is sweet. I mean, that's such an interesting thing about plants is when you're making a preparation, you have to ask what part of the plant, as this person is doing. Great question. Because, you know, different parts are going to have different qualities.
Yeah, I love roasted burdock root. So good.
Yes, so good.
Then as everyone can see, I've got the website for In Our Own Hands, the Women's Wellness Series pulled up. So I definitely invite you all to join us and use that discount code. And we would love to see you all there. So as we're wrapping things up, anything else you'd like to share, Linda?
Yes, I just noticed as you were scrolling up, there are scholarships and those are available to elders and to women of color. So if you or someone else you know would like a scholarship, we always give away, I mean, pretty much every event we do, we give away 10 or more scholarships because we really want this information to be accessible to as many people as possible. So, and if you have extra money and you're registering, you can donate to the scholarship fund as well. So yeah, but look at all these beautiful faces of all of these women that are going to be with us. And we're super excited. So I hope that people will join us. Thanks for being here this evening. And we will do these kind of events periodically. So keep your eyes and ears open.
Great. Well, with that, definitely a big thank you to everyone and have a fabulous evening. And thank you, Linda, for sharing all of your knowledge with us. It is so, so valuable and so very much appreciated. Lots of thanks and kudos coming in from the chat right now.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see all your faces.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. And I think we can go ahead and end the meeting. Which I can't do. Uh-oh. I was going to end the meeting, but then I see, oh, I can leave.
Stay on and check with you and with you and Maria.
Okay, perfect. Well, I will speed that process up for us. Like if you're sticking around, I'm going to go ahead and put you in the waiting room, just FYI. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, it's just us. And then I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.